Hi everyone and welcome to my live feed. Now I know that I don't get very many people signing in, but they do later on hopefully. So welcome, and for this is what I'm calling my live feed and the ramble, because I'm going to talk about a lot of shit that probably not all that many people are interested in, but nevertheless I'm going to have that conversation with you about the topics that interest me, and hopefully they may interest you. I just want to start by saying that I was with a group of friends on Tuesday, and now being Thursday, and I was asked what is it like to be retired. Now, as I've said on some of these feeds before, I don't like the term retired, and part of my challenge is to have a YouTube channel, to be an older person, to talk about things that interest me, that may interest you, but I am also mindful of many people who watch YouTube are usually in a much younger demographic than mine. But I'm prepared to fight against the odds, do what I can in order to be different, which is what I've probably done most of my life, and the YouTube channel is part of that challenge. Anyway, someone asked me what it was like, and my immediate response was, it is nice now. And I don't mean this to denigrate any of the thousands of clients I've had over the years, but just appreciate the position I'm now in, where I don't get any more phone calls. Like today, and for most of this week, I haven't had any phone calls at all, apart from those that I've had to make out. So it is a good feeling to know that, for example, now my phone is off. It's the first time it's been off all day because I'm doing this recording. But apart from that, I don't turn my phone off. And I don't get any messages occasionally from people wanting to scam me. Of course, that's the way it goes. But nevertheless, I don't seem to have all that many phone calls anymore. And someone asked whether that was a real relief. And my immediate response was, it is different. It is recognising also that I was under continual pressure from people to provide solutions to their problems, which often I didn't have. We had to work that out together. But there was a dependence upon me to work out certain issues, particularly around child protection. And now I don't have to do any of that, and everybody that I've ever worked with seems to know that I'm retired. Initially, I got a number of phone calls when I first retired a few weeks back, where people was almost begging me and wanted to pay me money to work with them, and I just had to say no, because if I did it for one, I was going to have to do it for another, and so forth, and I'd just be back to where I was. But people have realised the fact that I'm no longer not doing any client work. This is the work that I'm doing. So what it has done is it's freed me up to do some of my interview type work, and I've just got a number of interviews at the moment in the can that one of them I'll hopefully will be releasing today on this site, another one in another couple of days, and then I've got a third one which I made, which I'll be releasing next week sometime, because by the time I edit them and put fancy shit in there, it takes a bit of time, plus the fact I still have to learn the bloody software. So that's what I'm doing, and I hope that you can join me in this journey, because what I want to do also from time to time is just talk about what this is like for me to no longer be doing the work that I was doing and to start something new, which I'm completely unfamiliar with, and that there is a incredible learning path that I have to follow as well. It's a challenge, I know, but it's one that I'm celebrating. My biggest fear had been that when I give up my practice, I would have nothing else to do. I'd sit in front of a television set and just become a big blub. But still trying to play golf, certainly do that once a week, occasionally twice a week. But I'm trying to find other ways to do things that are not about me becoming inconsequential. I think that each one of us has a purpose, that purpose doesn't end just because we reach a certain age or decide to give up what we've been doing. And I don't think it matters whether you're 45, 65 or 75, that the reality is that if you wish to, most people change the type of occupation that they've been doing, or the type of work they've been doing anyway, about 4 times during their lifetime. I've done it probably 100 times, but the last 30 years it has been pretty consistent in terms of the social work practice I've been, but then I've taken on different areas of social work. So the variety of stuff that one can do in a lifetime is immense. And I don't believe that it necessarily needs to stop once you reach a certain age and you choose to give up a particular portion of your work. In fact, one could argue that I've retired many, many times from social work because I've gone from working for organisations to working for myself, for working in different aspects of child protection and working with veterans and working in homelessness and running programs for Relationships Australia. There's many things I've done that has been about retiring from one area and moving into another. And I see this just as another opportunity to retire from or to leave behind me my client work and to move into another area where I'm telling people's stories, but I'm telling those stories differently. So instead of sitting with someone and working through the issues with them, I'm hearing what they have to say, I'm videoing that, and I'm putting that in a format which hopefully you will find interesting. What I will be doing though is, at the moment, those videos will be appearing on this particular channel, but I'm going to start another channel called probably People's Voice Publishing, which will be about hearing those people's voices and just having them as videos. So when I start that, I'd like you to join me on that particular channel as well, so you can be notified also there about any future videos that I do, which are about how people are living their lives. And they don't have to be super important people. They have a story to tell. They might have a story to tell around a certain topic or a certain area that's interested them. Well, I want to tell that story too. And but it may not necessarily be about them being people that you know. They're probably not. In fact, if you've got a story and you would like to tell me that story, then you please make a comment below, or you can email me at tony@tonytonkin.com.au. Let me know what you think about that. Join with me to try and make this a little bit more exciting for me and for you as well. I would like you to participate in the type of work that I'm doing now, because I think it has importance to all of us. Everybody's story can be told, everybody's story needs to be told, and I'm doing that through videography. So please join me in that. I've got a few things I want to talk about today. The first one is the Matildas. Now, we weren't successful at making our way through the finals, but we were successful in doing something that I don't believe any other team has done. Now, I can remember as far back as Australia winning the America's Cup, and what an incredible moment that was. And Bob Hawke suggesting that if someone chose not to allow people off on that day after that, then they were bastards. And that was fair enough. It was a momentous occasion. It was a competition in which the Americans have won year in, year out, because they rig it. And so it was amazing that we had actually won that, and Alan Bond had put all the money up and so forth, and all power to him, I guess. But the Matildas seems to be different. I lived through that moment, and there was a moment in 1974 when Australia also got into the finals of got into the final 16 anyway, in the World Cup, the men's competition, in the Soccer World Cup. And we have now, with the women, done exactly the same thing, but even went further. Now, the important thing to me is the way that kind of galvanised our community. In the period that I have been alive, which is reasonably extensive, I've never, ever come upon a time where there was so much chatter about the Matildas and what they've been able to accomplish, and some of their stars and who they are, and so on. And the women's competition in particular. The fact, I think, that it was a women's competition and it was so engaging, and that we were able to express our delight, our joy, our pleasure in watching these women play this particular sport, I think tells us a lot about who we are as a country and what it means to us to be successful in these areas and what it means for women, particularly, to find success in this particular field as well. I noticed that in the United States, when the United States lost the competition and they were not able to go into the semi-finals, Donald Trump just reflected on what a terrible thing it was for their country, that somehow their soccer team, who had won the World Cup previously, weren't able to make it any further, and what a catastrophe that it was. And that just tells us a lot about Donald Trump, frankly. But I think what this tells us, even though we weren't able to go to the finals, tells us a lot about who we are as a country. Now, I hate using the word patriotism because it just reminds you of the United States version of patriotism, which is, you've got to carry a gun, you've got to be misogynist, anti-Semitic, and a whole host of other things, I guess, to be patriotic over there. What it means here, though, is that we don't often in Australia talk about the love we have for our country. We take that as a given. It doesn't have to be something that we have to hold up like a banner all the time and express it in the most favourable possible terms. It is something that we just kind of accept as being who we are as Australians. And we have a number of challenges in relation to that right at the moment, because we have the voice to Parliament, the recognition of Indigenous people, and we have a growing sense of who we are in terms of the multiculturalism that sits within this particular country. And we embrace so many different cultures here. All of them, all of those people that are in different cultures are Australians. And we as Australians tend to accept, hopefully, that regardless of your culture, you are still Australians, whether you're white, born here, whether you're Muslim, born here, whether you're Greek or Italian and born here, whether you come from an African country to Australia, and whether you have offspring and they're born here. Whatever it matters, doesn't matter. All of those people are Australians, and many of those people that come here, that immigrate here, take on Australian citizenship because this is a great country. It's a great country. But it does have its problems, and it certainly has its racism. And so there's no denying any of that. But it was the Matildas that gave us a sense that regardless of all of that, we didn't talk. While the Matildas were winning, we were on a high. And we didn't need to talk, and we didn't need to have those heavy conversations that we've had around the voice. In fact, it gave us a space in which we could sit back and look at who we are and what it is that we do that has value. And I think that there was an opportunity, in fact, for us to see ourselves differently. In fact, it was probably an opportunity to see us more in this mature form of who we are than anything else before. So I'm going to highlight I'm going to change tack a little bit, I guess, after that 13-minute rant. And I'm going to talk about the realities of a subject that I've talked about on many occasions, which is really Murdoch Press, bastards, and the things that they do, which influence the way many of us who watch their crap, who read their papers, who listen to their social feed. So I'm going to talk about, again, and I know that some of you might be pretty bored with this subject, but who gives a shit? I'm going to talk about it anyway, and that is there's an article in the Independent Australian on Murdoch's commentators poisoning voice debate. Now, I've had many conversations during my feeds about Cruella Credlin and the way she presents herself, and the same applies to many people within the Murdoch Press, and we'll come to highlight who some of them are at the moment. But I'm just going to highlight this article. It's titled Murdoch's Commentators Poison Voice Debate. And you'll see from this that the person that's being featured on the front of this is Cruella Credlin. And why wouldn't you? Because she's the face of this horrific organisation. And also, she's not the only face. There are others such as Peretti, whatever her name is. There's Bolt, there's most of them actually. Terrible, terrible human beings when it comes to discussing most issues that most of us would see as socially appropriate. But nevertheless, this is sort of crap that she carries on with. So this is a research organisation that's been having a look at the way she's been presenting around the voice issue. Now, I've been highlighting this for weeks now. In fact, even though I'm just a sole presenter on YouTube, I do believe I was one of the first persons to recognise the fact that this particular media outlet had such a negative version of the voice that it was racist in orientation, that it determined and tried to redefine the debate where it really was unnecessary to do so, because this is not about racism. But this is the way they have chosen to be able to have this debate. So leading research on Australians from Murdoch Royal Commission, Murdoch Referendum Accountability Project, my team, this is the author speaking, and I are watching in real time as powerful News Corp voices try to undermine facts about the voice to Parliament. Well, we know that. I've been talking about it forever. What we weren't expecting is other News Corp personalities to call this out. That's an interesting notion. One of the interesting findings from this project so far is that we have identified some excellent journalism at the Australian and Sky News, even more impressive, which is offering balanced, factual and useful information to audiences. Our project uses quantitative methods that intricately analyse content from the Australian, the other newspapers, to identify by number and percentage of words which voices are included and mentioned, which yes and no arguments are given coverage, and how the yes and no campaigns are characterised. Using this method, we found Sky News documentary The Voice Australian Decides by Northern Territory journalist Matt Cunningham gave yes and no voices almost equal coverage. Cunningham also spoke to Indigenous people in their communities who aren't politicians or commentators, who have had little opportunity to be heard amongst the swath of political voices dominating most media reporting. Now, it goes on to say, and I think this is worth noting, and I've never said that Sky News is just determined to focus on the negative. What I always have said is that there are specific journalists or opinion pieces that Sky News tend to propagate who continually say things that are of a distinct bias and of a negative nature in relation to this campaign. It goes on to say, Sky News, for example, in our first 3 weeks of analyses from 17th of July to the 6th of August, the 6 hosts with the most coverage about the voice from most to least were, now this is interesting because these are the ones that I point out: Andrew Bolt, Peter Credlin, Sherry Markson, Paul Murray, Laura Jays and Rita Panaha. Now, of these 6, Laura Jays is the most likely to platform yes voices, and that is true. The most prolific, however, Andrew Bolt and Peter Credlin are also, I'll just highlight this, the most prolific, however, Andrew Bolt and Peter Credlin are also the ones most actively opposing the voice and muddying the facts of the referendum. So the important thing to note here is that there is some acknowledgement that at Sky News there has been, in some areas, and that is in the general media coverage, there has been a reasonable balance. But that's not my point. My point is that the right wing, the people that are focused in the particular right wing bubble, always go to people like Bolt, Markson, Murray, and Rita Panahi. So this is true. So be wary of these people, and let's remember that this particular organisation is Murdoch Press, and that Murdoch Press in particular are quite anti the debate on the voice, because basically they are prejudiced. Now, there's another article here which is interesting, I think, which is an article referring to Thomas Mayo. Now, there's been a heck of a lot of conversations about Thomas Mayo's references to the voice in the past and how he has taken some extreme views. But what he is saying here, that the prominent Yes campaigner says voice referendum, now this is what Mayo's saying, is that prominent Yes campaigner says voice referendum has spawned new lows in political discourse. So he believes, and I believe this as well, that in fact I believe the Yes campaign is going to get over, because I don't think Australians are all that stupid. And I don't think not enough people would listen and accept the arguments from the No campaign, even though a reasonable percentage, I guess, do watch Sky News and also may contribute to the Australian and the other Murdoch presses, the Advertiser and so forth, even though I don't see all that much negative stuff in the Advertiser here in Adelaide. But nevertheless, people will be influenced by that. But at the end of the day, most Australians are reasonable, and they will understand that the Voice is simply about recognising Indigenous people in a way that they've never been recognised before, and that is a precursor to setting up an organisation that will represent them and that will be able to tell governments what it is that Indigenous people want done that's going to benefit them directly. So that's it in a nutshell. Let's recognise them in the Constitution to begin with. And there are reasons why that is particularly important, even though states tend to recognise Indigenous people via legislation. There is a reason why it has to be in the Constitution. I won't go into that right now. Thomas Mayo says, however, the Yes campaign is in a good place as he urges Australians to read deeply into the Indigenous voice to Parliament and cut through misinformation. The campaign is enshrined Indigenous voice to Parliament in the Constitution is in a good place. Despite falling polls and the sheer volume of hatred, lies and misinformation, the Pro-Voice campaign, Thomas Mayo has said, we are rapidly growing our volunteer base. If you want to join, there are certain sites you can go to. Just type into Google the Voice to Parliament, the Yes campaign, volunteer, and you'll find that there are appropriate sites near you where you can get involved. We are rapidly growing our volunteer base. We're seeing a lot more activity and we're seeing a lot more visibility. We're a couple of months away, and that is true. He's been on the end, and this is the terrible thing, I think, is that in this country, if you take a position that is extreme left, you're going to be targeted. Now, this is an international problem, I think, that for some reason the right wing are more vocal and more violent than what are the left wing. Now, some of you might disagree with me on that. If so, show me some examples. I'd be interested to see what they are. But certainly, when we take a stance, which was like the one I took the other day or yesterday when I did a post, which was there are either two things. Either if you're going to vote no, you're either misinformed or you're a racist. You're one of those two things. There may be a third. Let me know what you think it might be. But basically, that's it. And if you have read all the information and you do consider that you're informed and still want to vote no, I'd be interested to know why that is. Because the information is out there, always has been, regardless of what Credlin and others have said about this extra 26 pages and the criticism that they've made of Albanese because he said he hasn't read it because there's no need to read it because all he needed to know was what was in the statement. So it's the executive summary of all the work they've done over many years. They've encapsulated in that statement. That's all that he needed to know. And I think, basically, that that's fair enough. That's all you do need to know. So let's proceed. So Mayo has been in the receiving end of personal attacks during the campaign. He was subject to racist cartoon in an advertisement published by the Australian Financial Review. No problems there, is there really, I guess? No, none at all. The cartoon appeared in a full page authorised by Fair Australia, the main group campaign against The Voice, and the Financial Review. Later on decided because of the objection they had by the public against that, they took it down and they apologised. Matt Keane, a New South Wales Liberal MP, called the ad a throwback to the Jim Crow era of the Deep South. And to some extent, I think that is true, that there's this... we in Australia, I think, had our own Deep South. We had a time whereby we were dealing with Aboriginal people in the most horrific possible manner that you can think of. There's Andrew Bolt. I don't even know whether I've got it here. There's this thing, I might play this one for you in a moment, but this is where Andrew Bolt chooses to highlight the issues around the violence that was inflicted upon Indigenous people, but he couches it in a really interesting way, I think, that says that, so he couches everything in a, so did this really happen? Did it happen to the extent that it did? Is it, it's something that we don't need to be responsible for because we didn't do it? There's all those sort of arguments that come out in this. I'll just play a little bit of this for you, providing this works, and then we'll talk about it as we go through it.
Talk about the Albanese government's voice, about its plan for a treaty too, about reparations even. And it's this: which Australians are supposed to be given these special rights and compensation? Well, we're told it's Aborigines, of course. And I think, really? Really? Are taxpayers really supposed to compensate people like Thomas Mayo? Why do three of the people on this stage owe something to the fourth there? That's Thomas Mayo. Why him? And for what?
I'm a Kurrareg Aboriginal man and Kapugal Erabumle Torres Strait Islander.
Mayo, well, he now calls himself Mayo, he changed his name, is a Torres Strait Islander. Aboriginal, Indigenous. That's why taxpayers, like me and most of you, we owe him. But the Mayo case, I think, sums up one of the massive problems with the voice, the treaty and demands for reparations. Thomas Mayo, for many now, is the face of the Yes campaign for Labor's voice. It's Aboriginal in the Advisory Parliament in our Constitution.
I like the way now that he makes this. The Mayo has to be the voice for. I don't know how that came out audibly because I haven't checked that particular flow of audio. But basically, what he was saying is that Mayo's come out as the voice because he has said some things in the past which are quite radical, and he also talks about Indigenous people seeking reparation for the damage that had been done to them. And there is a strong argument for that. Lydia Thorpe comes up with the same argument and did so at a press conference, the National Press Club just during the week. And I think it's a fair argument. There's an interesting conversation that my wife and I had recently, which was about slave owners in the Pacific, British slave owners in the Pacific, up until earlier this century, 21st century, their families were paid reparation for the cost it took for them to dispense with the slaves. Shall I repeat that? The slave owners were, their families up until recent, so this is slave owners back in the 1700s or whatever it was, who had slaves in the Pacific region, Bahamas, whatever. They were paid, their families were paid by the government reparation for the cost of losing their slaves when they changed the rules about slavery. Now, there hasn't been, I struggle with that notion myself. I wrestle with that idea because it's hard to imagine that the people who committed the horrors about enslaving human beings are the ones that are receiving payments for the fact that they lost the opportunity to continue to enslave human beings, and that they were paid for the cost of that up until halfway through this century, through this decade. So I think it was 2015 it stopped or something. But anyway, so if that's the case, if we do have a principle that says people need to receive some sort of payment for the damage done to them, okay, I'll lose my slave trade, got to pay out that family, and that continues on for centuries. Why is it that we can't then pay something to Indigenous people for all the things that we may have done to them. It is beyond me, and yet clowns like this particular dude here, Andrew Bolt, continually push this negative narrative because they know that this is the narrative that will sink the Yes campaign. That the fear that Australians somehow will be taken over by Indigenous people, and Indigenous people are only 1/3 of, or 3%, I should say, of our population. Therefore, they are insignificant. What happens to the rest of us? So let's discount whatever's happened to Indigenous people over the years, because for people like Andrew Bolt, it doesn't matter. They don't care. But they don't understand intergenerational trauma and how that has particularly impacted Indigenous people to this very day. And then he goes on to highlight the statistics, and I find this horrific. And I'm not going to play it because it's just so revolting. So he goes on to highlight the statistics around domestic violence, abuse of children, and a whole lot of the statistics which are extremely negative when you look at First Nations people in general. We ignore the fact that they happen in our community at horrific levels. So in the neglect of children, which is one of my areas of expertise, I guess, happens at an amazing level. That the violence towards women, 1 in 4 or 5 women experience domestic violence. Many women in our community experience sexual abuse. Many people experience bullying. There's lots of issues in our society which certainly need to be handled, dealt with, managed and understood. But when it comes to Indigenous people, Bolt seems to think, pardon me, Bolt seems to think that those issues, because they are what he would say would be extreme in Indigenous communities, mean that Indigenous people are poor people. They're disgraceful people, that they don't know how to control themselves, that they have rampant sexual assault within their community, that most of them are alcoholics and drug addicted and violent people. And this is just not true. But this is the message he wants to give, because he's a racist. Only racists would present that view without having a look at the total picture, right? So we could argue, if he wants to do that, we could argue that in our general community, violence is rampant. Sexual assault is rampant. 1 woman is killed by their partner in our community every 14 days. 1 woman. Every day children are being sexually assaulted. Every day there are pedophiles being investigated by the Australian Federal Police. Every day something terrible is happening in our community which should horrify all of us. But no, Bolt wants to focus on what's happening in the Indigenous community because that suits his racist narrative. And it's wrong. And we must find ways to call it out whenever we can, because the man's a horrible, horrible individual. And you and I should make a stand against people like him, because if you're only getting one part of the picture, you're getting a distorted view. You have to be able to look at the whole picture so that you can look at it in balance, And he says somewhere, like he dropped this line. So the first thing is, he drops this line about, it's not like, so he drops the line that I have an Aboriginal friend, basically. So that's the first thing. If anybody ever says, I believe all this stuff, the stuff that Andrew Bolt's talking about, but I have a friend who's Indigenous, immediately think racist. Because somehow he's thinking, because I know an Aboriginal person, I am not racist. But I've worked with lots of Aboriginal people over the years. And I've worked with people because they have drug problems and there are issues around neglect. There's a whole host of issues. I want to add that I've worked with a stack of white people, Caucasian people, Anglo people, who have just got the same issues, right? Perhaps in greater number because there's more of them, but they're there, right? But it didn't matter where they came from, whether they're Indigenous or not. The issues were still there, and the issues had to be worked through. They were, except with Indigenous people, the thing that really struck me the most, I think, was that there was an intergenerational trauma. There was for example, the most obvious one to me is fear of welfare, because they knew that their parents or their parents' parents were taken by the government as children. And they knew that their involvement with the police was always suspect, because the police would always pick on them as opposed to Caucasian or white or other friends. So they knew that the system itself was focused against them. Now, I don't think people like Andrew Bolt would even know what it was like to grow up in an environment whereby you felt targeted specifically just because of the colour of your skin. And because of the type of shit that he speaks about, which is the generalisation of issues that happen within Indigenous communities, because those issues are not just theirs, they're all of our issues, right? But for Indigenous people, they're sometimes there because of what us white people and our politicians have done to them, which is the reason why the voice should be so important. But they get away with it, and we need to be wary of it, I think. So there's just another couple of issues that I wanted to talk about before I go. So if you are here, could you leave us a comment? Let us know what you think. Become a party to the conversation. Subscribe to my, I don't know how this is going to work. Yeah, just subscribe to my channel if you would. That would be really, really nice. Leave a comment below and let me know what you think. I'm just going to finish off with this particular, two things. Mark Latham. Now, so some of you may not know who Mark Latham was or is. Mark Latham was the Labor leader some decade or so ago, quite a while ago now, and he was terrible. He's a foul-mouthed, rude, misogynistic prick. So he was kicked out of that role. I don't know why in the world the Labor Party thought he had value and that he should have that position. But anyway, he was kicked out, later left Parliament, wandered around for a little bit because no one would employ him, I don't think, found a role with Sky News, and then he joined One Nation, which is extreme right, racist group of people, which probably fitted with Mark Latham better than anybody else. And because he did have a profile, and he was in New South Wales, he stood for the upper house in New South Wales, he won. He became the leader of One Nation in that state because the revolting individual Pauline Hanson is in Queensland and she's the federal leader. But recently, she has got sick of him and she sacked him from that role and has taken over the New South Wales One Nation Party and incorporated that into the National Party and is running that from Queensland, dissolved their executive, told Latham to bugger off, and he's probably said, no, I won't. So there's an interesting statement he made, and I just want to talk about that for a bit. He also said the decision was not about performance, but about money, and made claims he had stopped the misuse of taxpayer funds while in a top job. Now, it's obvious I'm not going to agree a lot with whatever Mark Latham says, but we do know that Pauline Hanson was at one point jailed for misuse of funds, which she was exonerated for or whatever later on. She challenged it and she won the case. But the point is that Pauline Hanson sees the opportunity to be a politician, not just to advocate her right-wing and racist views, but also because she can reward herself financially. And the way that is done is that for every vote that you get over a certain limit, you get $1. So if you've got 1 million votes, for example, you get $1 million over a certain level. I won't give you the formula because I can't remember it, but it's something like that. So that's how they make their money from political parties, apart from the income they individually earn from being parliamentarians. So he says, as New South Wales One Nation leader, I've stood in the way of attempts to misuse our funds, especially the administration money contributed by New South Wales taxpayers through the Electoral Commission. That's what I was just referring to. I will continue to fight for the proper ethical use of this money. A spokesman for Hanson denied the claims of attempts to misuse funds. I for one would not be surprised if she did. Mark Latham got onto it, perhaps did the right thing and said, you can't do this stuff. This money belongs to, and particularly if it belongs to New South Wales and his re-election opportunities, he would have kicked up a fuss. They said the party had seen a vote drop in the March state election and the priority was to review the structure before future elections. So one of the reasons that Hanson had decided to do away with Mark was because she realised that Mark had more power in New South Wales than she did, and she probably didn't like that idea as well. Even though, so it's interesting, isn't it? You've got this fight between these two revolting individuals over who should be leader of a particular party in what state. Hanson won because she simply has more power and authority than others. Latham lost because he doesn't. So I thought that was an interesting discussion to have. There was, and there were a number of issues which I will talk about in my next live feed. So I just want to say, look, thanks everybody for being with me. There's not that many people that are online at the moment. I can't really tell because I can't bring it up. But nevertheless, look, thanks for being here. Take care. Look after yourselves and your family and make sure that you're safe. Thanks, everybody. Bye.